20 years of military service meant nothing to the security guards, who demanded Solomon Dryden leave the auditorium. But as the retired black Marine stood his ground, 6 white figures rose silently throughout the crowd. The graduation ceremony froze. Nobody expected what happened next. Before we dive into this powerful story of courage and respect, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone stand up against discrimination, and subscribe to join our community of storytellers who believe in justice. Now, let's rewind to discover how a day meant for celebration became a battlefield of dignity. Solomon Dryden sat on the edge of his bed, turning the embossed invitation over in his weathered hands. After 25 years as a Marine Corps commander with 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, he had received countless commendations. But none filled him with the pride he felt holding his son Elijah's law school graduation invitation from Westwood University. The thick cream paper felt substantial between his fingers, much like the weight of the journey that had brought them here. Solomon closed his eyes, remembering the countless obstacles he had faced throughout his military career. Despite his impeccable record and steady promotions, he had encountered discrimination at every rank. As a young lieutenant, white subordinates had questioned his orders until his superior confirmed them. As a captain, he'd been stopped at base entrances despite wearing full uniform, guards insisting they needed extra verification. Even as a commander, he'd attended military galas where attendees assumed he was waitstaff despite his dress blues and medals. These memories washed over him as he considered his son's achievement. Elijah had worked twice as hard as his classmates, overcoming subtle and not-so-subtle racism throughout his education. He'd earned his undergraduate degree with honors from Howard University before being accepted to Westwood's prestigious law program in Boston. Now, graduating at the top of his class with offers from major firms across the country, Elijah was blazing a trail Solomon had always known his brilliant son was capable of following. "You should wear your full-dress uniform," said Monique, Solomon's wife of 30 years, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. Her eyes, wise and knowing, held his gaze as she crossed the room to sit beside him. Solomon shook his head, running, his hand over his close-cropped salt and pepper hair. "I'm not sure that's the best idea. You know how it can be." Monique took his hand in hers. Her touch still sent the same warmth through him as it had when they'd met as teenagers in Atlanta. "That's exactly why you should wear it. Our son is graduating at the top of his class from one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. You've earned the right to be there in full recognition of who you are and what you've accomplished." Solomon considered her words carefully. Every time he wore his uniform in public, particularly in predominantly white spaces, it created tension. Some people showed excessive performative respect that felt hollow. Others revealed their discomfort through tight smiles and averted gazes. Worst were those who openly questioned his right to wear the uniform at all, yet Monique was right. This was his son's day, but it was also the culmination of their family's journey. He nodded slowly. "All right, full dress it is." The next morning they began preparing for their trip from their modest brick home in the suburbs of Atlanta to Boston. Solomon carefully packed his uniform, ensuring every medal and ribbon was perfectly placed. As he zipped the garment bag, his phone rang. It was Elijah. "Hey, Dad, just checking in about your flight tomorrow." Solomon could hear the tension in his son's voice. "We're all set. Should land around 4 in the afternoon. We'll take a cab straight to the hotel." There was a pause before Elijah spoke. Again. "Listen, Dad, about the ceremony. It's going to be pretty formal. Lots of judges, some politicians, wealthy donors. I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly." Solomon understood the unspoken concern. "Don't worry, son. I know how to navigate these waters, been doing it my whole career." He didn't mention the uniform. Their flight the next day brought the familiar parade of microaggressions. The ticketing agent double-checked their first-class tickets with poorly concealed surprise. A white flight attendant repeatedly asked to see their boarding passes when serving them. Solomon weathered each incident with practiced dignity, his jaw tightening slightly, but his composure never faltering. Monique squeezed his hand during turbulence, both the atmospheric kind and the social kind. Upon arriving at the Westwood Park Hotel, Solomon approached the front desk with their reservation confirmation. The manager, A thin white man with a tight smile studied Solomon's ID card with excessive scrutiny. "I'm not seeing your reservation, sir. Are you sure you have the right hotel?" Solomon remained perfectly calm as he pulled up the confirmation email on his phone. "Yes, I'm certain. Reservation number 89273, under Dryden." The manager tapped at his computer with obvious reluctance. "Ah, here it is. It was under a different spelling." No apology was offered as the key cards were slid across the counter. In their room, Solomon called Elijah to confirm their arrival. "We're all set, son. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." Elijah's voice was tight with anxiety. "Great. There's going to be a lot of important people there, Dad. My professors, potential employers, classmates, families." Solomon recognized his son's fear. Elijah wasn't ashamed of him, but rather afraid for him, knowing how these environments could turn hostile. "I understand, Elijah. I'll be there to support you, not to cause any waves." After ending the call, Solomon sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at his garment bag containing the uniform. Decades of service, and still he had to justify his presence in certain spaces. He wondered if his son was right to be concerned, if wearing the uniform might somehow overshadow Elijah's achievement. Monique sat beside him, reading his thoughts as she always could. "Wear it with pride, Solomon. Our son needs to see you stand in your full dignity." Solomon nodded, his resolve strengthening. He would wear the uniform, not despite the discomfort it might cause, but because of it. Some battles needed to be fought, even at a celebration. The morning of the graduation dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains, as Solomon methodically dressed in his Marine Commander uniform. Each button, each medal, each insignia represented years of service and sacrifice. He stood before the mirror adjusting his cap, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Monique appeared behind him in the reflection, her eyes shining with pride and concern. "You look every inch the commander," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his shoulder. Solomon nodded, a memory flashing unbidden from 5 years. Ego. He had arrived at a military ceremony in Virginia, wearing this same uniform with fewer medals then. Despite his rank clearly displayed, a young white security officer had blocked his path, demanding identification and questioning his invitation, while white officers of lesser rank walked past unhindered. It had taken the intervention of his superior officer to resolve the situation, and even then no apology was offered. The memory settled like a weight in his stomach as they left the hotel. Westwood University's campus sprawled across acres of manicured lawns and stately brick buildings. The architecture spoke of old money and older traditions, with ivy climbing walls that had stood for centuries. As their taxi approached the main gates, Solomon observed the clear socio-economic and racial divisions among the arriving families. White parents in expensive attire moved with entitled confidence, while the few families of color present seemed to hold themselves more carefully, as if aware they were guests in a space not designed for them. Solomon paid the driver and offered Monique his arm as they approached the security checkpoint. The contrast in treatment was immediate and unmistakable. White families, many including military personnel in uniform, passed through with casual nods from the security staff. When Solomon stepped forward, the guard's demeanor shifted. "ID and tickets, please," the guard demanded, his tone clipped. Solomon presented both items calmly. The guard, whose name tag read Garrick, examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, comparing Solomon's face to his ID multiple times. "Purpose of your visit today?" Garrick asked, despite the graduation tickets clearly displayed in his hand. "My son is graduating," Solomon replied evenly. "Class of 2025. The guard reluctantly returned the documents and waved them through, but not before Solomon overheard him mutter to his colleague, "These people always causing trouble, expecting special treatment." Solomon's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure, feeling Monique's hand squeeze his arm in silent support. They had faced this countless times before, mastered the art of swallowing indignities without sacrificing their dignity. As they walked toward the central quadrangle where families were gathering, Solomon reflected on advice his own commander had given him decades ago. Your dignity isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you carry yourself when they don't. Treat you with respect. Scanning the crowd, Solomon spotted Elijah standing with a group of his classmates near the law building. His son's face lit up upon seeing them, though Solomon noticed a flicker of anxiety cross his features as he registered the uniform. "Mom, Dad, you made it," Elijah said, embracing them both. He was resplendent in his graduation robes, the honors cords draped around his neck testifying to his achievements. "I'd like you to meet Tyler Harrington, my roommate." A tall white student stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Pleasure to meet you both. My parents are around here somewhere. Ah, there they are." He waved over a couple dressed in clothes that quietly announced their wealth. The introductions were polite but cool, with Mr. Harrington, a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit, giving Solomon's uniform a dismissive glance. "Military scholarship, was it?" he asked Elijah, not bothering to direct the question to Solomon himself. "Your parents must be very proud that you've risen above your circumstances." Elijah stiffened beside Solomon. "Actually, sir, I earned a merit scholarship based on my academic achievements, not my background." The elder Harrington nodded with a tight smile. Of course. Westwood has an excellent diversity program." Solomon maintained his diplomatic expression, decades of military service having taught him when battles were worth fighting, and when they were merely distractions. As they moved toward the auditorium, Solomon noticed Elijah's discomfort growing. His son kept glancing at the uniform, then at the predominantly white crowd around them. "Dad, I'm not sure the seating arrangement," he began, then stopped himself. "Never mind, you should be able to sit in the VIP section since I'm graduating with honors." Solomon nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. His uniform made him visible in a way that made his son nervous. As they approached the grand auditorium where the ceremony would be held, Solomon became aware of several pairs of eyes following their progress. 6 individuals, scattered throughout the crowd, seemed to be watching him with unusual interest. They weren't security, nor did they appear to be faculty. Something about their bearing, the way they carried themselves, suggested military training. Solomon made note of their positions almost unconsciously, an old habit from his days in combat zones. One nodded slightly in his direction, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed by anyone not trained to notice such things. Solomon returned, the nod equally subtle, and guided Monique toward the entrance, wondering what their presence might signify. The auditorium of Westwood University gleamed with polished wood and brass fixtures, its high ceiling adorned with intricate moldings that spoke of the institution's centuries-old heritage. Solomon and Monique followed the usher's directions to the VIP section reserved for parents of honors graduates. The seats were positioned near the front, offering an excellent view of the stage where Elijah would soon receive his law degree. As they settled into their seats, Solomon noticed the subtle shifts in posture from nearby white families, the almost imperceptible widening of space around them. He had long ago learned to recognize these small adjustments, the physical manifestation of discomfort his presence created in predominantly white spaces. Monique, elegant in her deep blue dress, sat with perfect posture beside him, her dignity a match for his own. The auditorium began filling with excited families, the buzz of conversation creating a pleasant hum of anticipation. Solomon watched as students in their caps and gowns filed into the designated seating area, searching for Elijah among the sea of faces. His moment of quiet pride was interrupted by 2 security guards approaching with purposeful strides. Their name badges identified them as Frank Donovan and Peter Wells, both white men with close-cropped hair and tight expressions. "Excuse me, sir, ma'am," Donovan addressed them with barely concealed impatience. "There seems to have been a seating mistake. We need to relocate you to the general seating section in the back." Solomon maintained his calm demeanor, developed through decades of similar encounters. "There's no mistake," he replied, producing their tickets. "These are VIP section seats for parents of honors graduates. My son, Elijah Dryden, is valedictorian." Wells barely glanced at the tickets. "I understand, sir, but this section is reserved for special guests. The back section has been designated for other attendees." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Solomon noticed several white families with identical tickets seated comfortably around them, undisturbed by security. "My..." "Tickets indicate this is exactly where we should be seated," Solomon responded, his voice measured but firm. "Unless you can show me something in writing that contradicts this, we'll be staying right here." The confrontation was drawing attention now. Nearby families watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright disapproval. An older white man in formal academic regalia, who Solomon would later learn was Dean Hamilton, walked past during the exchange. The dean nodded respectfully to the fathers of white students in military uniforms, but pointedly ignored Solomon despite his commander's insignia. The security guards grew more insistent. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," Donovan said, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his radio. "We're authorized to maintain appropriate decorum in this ceremony." Solomon felt Monique tense beside him, but kept his own expression neutral. "I've been maintaining decorum for 25 years in the United States Marine Corps," he replied evenly. "I'm simply sitting in the seats assigned to us for our son's graduation. There's no cause for escalation here." From the corner of his eye, Solomon could see Elijah in the staging area, watching the confrontation with growing distress. The pride in his son's eyes was now clouded with fear and embarrassment. Solomon felt a familiar pain in his chest, the unique anguish of a black parent watching their child learn yet another lesson about the world's unfairness. The situation escalated when a third security official approached, a heavy-set man whose badge identified him as Calvin Brooks, security supervisor. Without even checking their tickets, Brooks immediately took his subordinate's side. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, addressing the guards rather than Solomon. "These individuals are refusing to comply with seating arrangements," Wells explained, emphasizing these individuals with unmistakable disdain. Brooks turned to Solomon, his expression stern. "Sir, we need to maintain an appropriate atmosphere for our distinguished families today. I'll have to ask you to move to the designated area or leave the premises." Solomon remained perfectly still, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. "My family is distinguished by my son's achievements as valedictorian and my own service to this country. We have valid tickets for these exact seats. Unless you can provide a legitimate reason beyond vague references to appropriate atmosphere, we will remain here." Brooks's face hardened. "Sir, this is private property. We have the right to remove anyone who doesn't comply with staff instructions." He nodded to the other guards who moved slightly closer. "Campus police have been notified. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Solomon felt the weight of every battle he'd fought for respect throughout his career. He thought of Elijah, who had worked twice as hard as his peers to reach this moment. He would not allow his son to see him shuffled to the back, diminished and dismissed. "I understand this is difficult for you," Solomon said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby attendees. "But what you're asking is not appropriate, legal, or just. We will not be moving." "What's your reaction to this blatant discrimination against a decorated Marine at his own son's graduation?" Comment number 1 if you believe Solomon was right to stand his ground, or number 2 if you think he should have moved to avoid conflict on his son's special day. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone having to fight for the respect they've earned, and subscribe to hear more stories about courage in the face of injustice. The tension is building in this auditorium, but would you have expected? What happens next? 6 mysterious figures are watching this confrontation unfold, but who are they and why are they so interested in this Black Marine commander's treatment? Let's continue. The tension in the auditorium had reached a breaking point. Security Supervisor Brooks stood glowering at Solomon, his hand hovering near his radio, ready to call for campus police reinforcement. Monique gripped her husband's arm, her fingers tight with anxiety, but her expression resolute. Solomon maintained his composed stance, neither aggressive nor submissive, simply immovable in his conviction. The confrontation had captured the attention of many nearby attendees, most of whom watched with uncomfortable silence, unwilling to involve themselves. Then, without warning or fanfare, a single figure stood from his seat, 3 rows behind Solomon. He was an older white man with steel-gray hair, dressed in a simple but clearly expensive charcoal suit. He wore no uniform or insignia, yet something in his bearing marked him unmistakably as military. The man said nothing, made no gesture, simply stood and fixed the security personnel with a steady gaze. A moment later, a second figure rose from a seat across the aisle. Then a third near the back of the auditorium. Within 30 seconds, 6 individuals had stood, positioned throughout the crowd like sentinels. They were diverse in age and ethnicity, but united in their silent vigilance. No words were exchanged, no signals given, yet their message was unmistakable. Solomon recognized the coordinated action immediately, though he maintained his focus on the security staff before him. The older man who had first stood moved forward with deliberate steps until he was positioned slightly behind Solomon's right shoulder. "Is there a problem here, Commander Dryden?" he asked, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to authority. Before Solomon could respond, the man extended his hand to the security supervisor. "Admiral James Caldwell, retired. Navy SEALs. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding seating arrangements." Brooks's demeanor shifted instantly, his face paling as he recognized the name. Admiral Caldwell leaned forward and whispered something brief in the supervisor's ear. Whatever he said caused Brooks to take a small step backward, his aggressive posture deflating visibly. "There appears to have been a miscommunication," Brooks stammered, glancing nervously at his subordinates. "Of course, Commander Dryden and his wife are welcome to remain in their assigned seats. We were simply confirming ticket allocations." The transparent attempt to save face might have been amusing under different circumstances. Solomon noted that the 5 other individuals who had stood remained in position, watching the exchange with alert eyes. As Brooks and his security guards began to retreat, a commotion near the main entrance drew attention. A distinguished-looking man in formal academic regalia entered, surrounded by several administrative staff. "That's President Richmond," Monique whispered, recognizing him from the university's website. The university president immediately noticed the unusual tableau near the front of the auditorium. His practiced smile faltered slightly as he assessed the situation, his gaze moving from the security personnel to Solomon to Admiral Caldwell. With a politician's instinct for potential problems, he approached their group. "Admiral Caldwell," President Richmond greeted warmly, extending his hand. "What an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you would be joining us today." The Admiral shook the offered hand with polite formality. "I wouldn't miss it. I'm here to support Commander Solomon Dryden and his exceptional son." He gestured to Solomon. "Commander Dryden is one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege of serving with. His son Elijah's achievements as valedictorian speak to the extraordinary character of this family." President Richmond's smile remained fixed, but his eyes revealed his discomfort. He turned to Solomon with carefully manufactured warmth. "Commander Dryden, welcome to Westwood. We're honored by your service and thrilled to have you with us today." The insincerity was palpable, particularly given the president's failure to intervene during the confrontation he had surely witnessed. Nevertheless, Solomon accepted the handshake with military courtesy. "Thank you, President Richmond. We're proud to be here for our son's achievement." With the immediate crisis apparently resolved, the security personnel retreated to the perimeter of the auditorium. Though Solomon noticed, they continued to watch him with barely concealed hostility. The other 5 individuals who had stood in solidarity gradually returned to their seats, though their vigilance never wavered. As Admiral Caldwell prepared to return to his own seat, he introduced Solomon to the nearest of his companions. "Commander Dryden, I believe you remember Commander Wilson Rivera." A fit Hispanic man in his 50s stepped forward, exchanging a firm handshake with Solomon. "Hard to forget the man who pulled our team out of that ambush in Fallujah," Rivera said quietly. "Some debts can never be repaid, but they're never forgotten either." As Rivera stepped away, Solomon felt a complex wave of emotions wash over him. The incident brought back memories of a classified Gulf War mission early in his career, when as a young officer, he had risked his life to extract a SEAL team caught behind enemy lines. He had never expected recognition for that operation, certainly not decades later, and in such unexpected circumstances. From the staging area, Solomon could see Elijah watching the exchange, his expression a mixture of confusion, relief, and lingering concern. Solomon gave his son a slight nod of reassurance as the graduates continued preparing for their procession. The ceremony would proceed, but Solomon understood that the underlying hostility remained, merely driven underground by the unexpected intervention. As families settled back into their seats and the orchestra began playing the processional music, Monique leaned close to her husband. "Those men," she whispered, "they came here for you, didn't they?" Solomon nodded slightly. "Not for me. For what's right." As the graduates began their march into the auditorium, Solomon watched his son walking tall among his peers and felt a fierce pride that transcended the unpleasantness of the confrontation. Today would still be Elijah's day, regardless of those who wished to diminish it. The grand auditorium hummed with anticipation as the orchestra concluded the processional music and the graduates settled into their seats. Solomon and Monique sat with perfect posture in the VIP section, their dignity intact despite the earlier confrontation. President Richmond approached the podium, adjusting his academic robes before leaning toward the microphone with a practiced smile. Distinguished faculty, honored guests, families, and most importantly, the graduating class of 2025, he began, his voice resonating through the hall. Today we celebrate not only academic achievement, but Westwood University's ongoing commitment to excellence, inclusion, and diversity. The words rang hollow after the incident Solomon had just experienced, the disconnect between rhetoric and reality painfully apparent. From his peripheral vision, Solomon could see the security guards who had confronted him now positioned at the auditorium's edges, their eyes repeatedly drifting in his direction. One had his hand resting on his radio, as if anticipating further trouble. Solomon's mind drifted momentarily to similar experiences throughout his military career. He remembered standing at attention during a promotion ceremony where a white junior officer had openly questioned his presence until his commanding officer intervened. He recalled the numerous times he'd been asked to show additional identification at military installations, while white officers were waved through. Even at the height of his career, attending strategic briefings at the Pentagon, he had been mistaken for support staff despite his commander's insignia. The president's speech continued with platitudes about the bright futures awaiting the graduates. Solomon refocused his attention on the stage, refusing to let past or present indignities diminish this moment. When President Richmond announced the presentation of degrees would begin with honors graduates, Solomon felt Monique's hand tighten around his. Their son would be among the first called. "Elijah Marcus Dryden," announced Dean Hamilton, his tone notably less enthusiastic than it had been for previous graduates. Valedictorian, editor of the Law Review, recipient of the Justice Marshall Scholarship, and accepted for clerkship with the United States Court of Appeals. The dean's deliberate minimization of Elijah's achievements was subtle but unmistakable. Where he had elaborated extensively on the accomplishments of other top students, particularly Tyler Harrington, Elijah's introduction was perfunctory despite his superior academic record. Solomon observed the reactions among the faculty seated on stage. Several professors beamed with genuine pride as Elijah crossed to receive his diploma, while others maintained neutral expressions that barely masked their resentment. It was a familiar pattern Solomon had witnessed throughout his life, the begrudging acknowledgement of black excellence. As Elijah accepted his diploma with a firm handshake, his eyes found his parents in the crowd. Solomon gave his son a subtle nod, conveying all the pride, love, and respect that couldn't be expressed in words at that moment. He noticed the 6 Navy SEALs positioned throughout the auditorium remained vigilant, their strategic placement creating an invisible protective network around his family. Admiral Caldwell, Solomon observed, was discreetly recording the ceremony on his phone, his attention focused not on Elijah but on the reactions of the university officials. The pattern of institutional racism affecting Elijah, despite his undeniable achievements, was becoming increasingly clear. When other top graduates with lesser accomplishments received effusive praise from the dean, the contrast was stark. The message was implicit but unmistakable. Elijah's success was viewed as an anomaly rather than earned through merit, a token nod to diversity rather than recognition of excellence. Monique squeezed Solomon's hand as Elijah returned to his seat, the gold honors cords around his neck gleaming under the auditorium lights. Their shared understanding required no words. This was a battle they had fought together for decades, preparing Elijah for a world that would simultaneously demand more from him while offering less recognition. After all graduates had received their diplomas, Dean Hamilton announced the valedictory address, and now Elijah Dryden will deliver this year's valedictory speech. Again, the introduction lacked the warmth and elaboration afforded to other speakers. Elijah approached the podium with confident steps, his bearing reminiscent of his father's military posture. His speech began with the expected acknowledgments of faculty and fellow students, but as he continued, Solomon recognized the subtle undercurrent addressing discrimination without directly referencing the day's events. "Excellence is not measured by the ease of the path," Elijah said, his voice strong and clear, "but by the obstacles overcome along the way. True justice means equal opportunity and equal recognition for equal achievement. As we leave these hallowed halls to become practitioners of the law, let us remember that justice is not just a concept we study, but a principle we must embody." The speech received a standing ovation from many in attendance, though Solomon noticed several faculty members and administrators, including President Richmond, remained seated, their applause perfunctory. As Elijah returned to his seat, President Richmond returned to the podium, visibly attempting damage control. "We thank valedictorian Dryden for those insightful words. I'd also like to acknowledge the distinguished service of his father, Commander Solomon Dryden of the United States Marine Corps, who joins us today." The belated recognition was transparently strategic, a public relations gesture rather than genuine respect. Solomon acknowledged the mention with a dignified nod, maintaining his composure despite the hollow nature of the acknowledgement. As the ceremony concluded with the traditional conferral of degrees, Solomon noticed Admiral Caldwell continuing to record on his phone. The Admiral caught Solomon's questioning glance and responded with the briefest of nods, a silent communication. That suggested this documentation might serve a purpose beyond mere memorabilia. When the recessional music began and the new graduates filed out of the auditorium, Solomon and Monique remained in their seats momentarily, allowing the crowd to thin. The confrontation had been diffused but not resolved, and Solomon sensed that the day's challenges were far from over. They would soon join Elijah for the reception, stepping once more into an environment where their presence was merely tolerated rather than welcomed. But with unexpected allies watching over them, the dynamics had shifted in ways Solomon was still processing. The post-graduation reception unfolded in the Grand Hall of Westwood University's historic Founders Building, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers creating an atmosphere of old-world opulence. White uniformed waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres as families mingled and celebrated. Solomon and Monique entered the hall with measured steps, immediately aware of the social dynamics at play. The reception had naturally segregated itself, with wealthy, white families clustering together near the center of the room, while families of color gathered in smaller groups near the periphery. The invisible boundaries were as clear as if they had been marked on the floor. Elijah found them quickly, his face flushed with the excitement of graduation, tempered by concern over the earlier confrontation. "Are you both okay?" he asked quietly, embracing each of his parents. "We're fine, son," Solomon assured him, pride evident in his voice despite the circumstances. "This is your day. Don't let anything diminish it." Solomon could see the conflict in his son's expression. As the valedictorian, Elijah was expected to network with influential alumni, judges, and potential employers. Yet he clearly felt torn between professional opportunity and loyalty to his parents. "Go mingle," Monique encouraged him gently. "We'll be fine." As Elijah reluctantly moved away to speak with a group of professors, Solomon noticed Dean Hamilton holding court among several wealthy-looking older men who appeared to be donors. The dean's voice carried just enough for Solomon to catch fragments of his conversation. "Of course we maintain standards, but our diversity initiatives sometimes require certain accommodations," the dean was saying. The playing field isn't always entirely level, if you take my meaning. The implication that Elijah's achievements were somehow the result of lowered standards rather than exceptional merit caused a controlled fury to rise in Solomon. With military precision, he navigated through the crowd until he stood at the edge of the dean's circle. "Excuse me, Dean Hamilton," Solomon interjected with perfect courtesy. "I couldn't help overhearing your comment about diversity and standards." The dean's expression froze, caught between social politeness and obvious discomfort. "I was merely explaining our university's commitment to creating opportunities for all students," he said smoothly. Solomon nodded, his expression pleasantly neutral while his eyes remained steel. "My son ranked first in standardized testing across all law schools in the northeastern region. His LSAT score was in the top 0.5% nationally. His undergraduate GPA was perfect. Perhaps you could clarify which accommodations were made for these achievements." The dean's face reddened slightly as the donors watched the exchange with uncomfortable interest. Two alumni trustees standing nearby exchanged meaningful glances, clearly concerned about the direction of the conversation. Before the dean could formulate a response, Solomon became aware of movement around the perimeter of the reception. Admiral Caldwell and the 5 other SEALs had positioned themselves strategically throughout the room, creating an informal protective formation around Solomon's family without drawing obvious attention. Their presence was subtle but unmistakable to anyone with military training. A tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached their group, his bearing suggesting authority and influence. "Dean Hamilton, I don't believe we've been formally introduced to the valedictorian's family," he said, extending his hand to Solomon. "Senator William Harrington, my son Tyler was your son's roommate." Solomon shook the offered hand, recognizing the father of Elijah's roommate. "Commander Solomon Dryden, United States Marine Corps. This is my wife, Monique." The senator's handshake was firm, his eye contact direct in a way that suggested genuine respect, rather than the performative courtesy Solomon had encountered from others. "Tyler has spoken very highly of your son," the senator continued. "In fact, he told me something quite interesting about Elijah's experience here at Westwood." The dean shifted uncomfortably as Senator Harrington continued. "My son confided that he witnessed systematic discrimination against Elijah throughout their time here. Papers graded more harshly, contributions in class overlooked, achievements minimized." The senator's direct acknowledgement of the discrimination hung in the air like a challenge. Before Dean Hamilton could respond, Tyler Harrington himself joined the group, nodding respectfully to Solomon and Monique. "It's true," he confirmed. "I saw professors grade identical legal arguments differently, based solely on whose paper they thought they were reading. Elijah's achievements aren't despite some advantage, Dean Hamilton. They're despite consistent disadvantages." The tension was broken by the abrupt arrival of Security Supervisor Brooks, now accompanied by 2 campus police officers. "Excuse me, Dean Hamilton," Brooks said with poorly concealed satisfaction. "We've received a complaint that Commander Dryden threatened you during your conversation. We'll need to escort him from the premises." The transparent attempt to remove Solomon created an immediate stir among those witnessing the exchange. To Solomon's surprise, it was Senator Harrington who stepped forward. "That's a serious accusation," the senator said, his tone sharpening. "As a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I find it particularly interesting. I've been standing here throughout this conversation, and no such threat occurred. Perhaps your officers would like to explain to me why they're pursuing this false claim." The campus police officers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for intervention from someone of the senator's stature. The confrontation had drawn attention from throughout the reception hall. More students and parents began to gather around the edges of the group, the celebration temporarily forgotten as the tension escalated. University officials could be seen conferring urgently near one of the exits, clearly concerned about the potential for public embarrassment. Solomon maintained his composure throughout, his military training evident in his calm demeanor, despite the obvious attempt to humiliate and remove him. As the situation threatened to escalate further, Admiral Caldwell stepped forward, his phone in hand. He made a brief call, speaking too quietly for those nearby to hear, then returned the phone to his pocket with a satisfied nod. "I believe this situation is about to resolve itself," he said to Solomon, as the main doors to the reception hall opened. "Have you ever witnessed someone attempt to use false accusations to remove a person of color from a space where they belonged? Comment number 1 if you've seen racial profiling firsthand, or number 2 if you believe institutions like Westwood University should be held accountable for systematic discrimination. Hit the like button if you appreciate Senator Harrington standing up for truth when it would have been easier to remain silent. Subscribe if you want to see how this confrontation reaches its breaking point. What do you think Admiral Caldwell has just set in motion with that phone call? And how will Elijah respond when forced to choose between his hard-earned career prospects and standing up for justice? The stakes are about to get much higher. The grand doors of the reception hall swung open to reveal a local news crew, camera equipment in hand, led by a sharp-eyed reporter whose determined expression suggested she recognized a significant story unfolding. The university officials near the entrance moved to intercept them, but Senator Harrington raised a hand in greeting. "Sarah Jenkins from Channel 7 News. Thank you for responding so quickly." The reporter nodded professionally, her cameraman already positioning himself to capture the scene. "Senator Harrington, you mentioned a developing situation regarding alleged discrimination at Westwood University." President Richmond pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with barely contained panic. "This is a private event," he insisted, placing himself between the reporter and the ongoing confrontation. "The university has not authorized any media presence." The reporter remained unperturbed. "Senator Harrington contacted us regarding a story of public interest involving a decorated military officer facing discrimination at a taxpayer-supported institution. We're well within our rights to investigate." The university's legal counsel, a stern-faced woman in a conservative suit, appeared at the president's side, whispering urgently in his ear. Solomon observed the exchange with the detached analysis he'd developed during military operations, noting the shifting power dynamics and calculating potential outcomes. The reporter turned her attention to Solomon. "Commander Dryden, I understand. There have been multiple incidents today involving discriminatory treatment by university staff. Would you care to comment?" All eyes turned to Solomon, the moment hanging in tense silence. He was acutely aware of the potential consequences for Elijah if he were to speak publicly about the discrimination they had faced. His military career had taught him to choose his battles carefully, to consider collateral damage before taking action. Before he could respond, Security Supervisor Brooks attempted to reassert control. This man was asked to relocate during the ceremony due to a seating misunderstanding and has now allegedly threatened a university dean. These are security matters, not discrimination. The reporter's skeptical expression made clear she recognized the flimsy justification. Interesting that security misunderstandings seem to predominantly affect people of color at Westwood. According to our research, there have been 17 formal complaints of racial profiling by campus security in the past 2 years alone. This revelation created a ripple of murmurs throughout the reception hall. President Richmond attempted damage control. Westwood University has a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. Any isolated incidents are not representative of our institution's values. As the confrontation escalated, Marcus noticed Elijah standing at the periphery, his expression torn between professional self-preservation and moral outrage. Solomon made a decision in that moment, stepping away from the cameras and approaching his son. "Elijah," he said quietly, "this doesn't have to be your fight. You've worked too hard to reach this point. If you want me to walk away from this, I will. Your future comes first." The conflict in his son's eyes was painful to witness. Solomon understood the impossible choice Elijah faced. Speaking out could jeopardize his clerkship, his career prospects, everything he had worked for. Remaining silent meant tacitly accepting the same system of discrimination that had harassed his father on what should have been a day of celebration. After a long moment, Elijah straightened his shoulders, a decision visibly crystallizing in his expression. He walked past Solomon toward the reporter, his graduation robe still draped over his shoulders. "My name is Elijah Dryden, Valedictorian of Westwood Law School, he began, his voice clear and steady. What happened to my father? Today is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern I've experienced throughout my education here. The reception hall fell completely silent as Elijah detailed specific instances of discrimination he had faced, from having identical legal arguments graded more harshly than his white peers to being repeatedly overlooked for academic opportunities despite superior qualifications. As he spoke, other minority students began to move forward, forming a semicircle behind him in silent support. Solomon felt an overwhelming pride watching his son transform from a cautious graduate protecting his career prospects to a principled advocate for justice, the very quality that had drawn him to the law in the first place. Admiral Caldwell stepped forward, his phone in hand. I have video documentation of today's incidents, he offered, including the security staff's actions and statements made by Dean Hamilton regarding accommodations for diversity students. He turned to Solomon. Commander Dryden saved my SEAL team during a classified Gulf War operation. When we learned he would be attending this ceremony, several of us decided to come, anticipating exactly this type of discrimination. We've seen it happen too often to decorated officers of color. The revelation that the SEALs had come specifically expecting Solomon to face discrimination was powerful testimony to the pervasiveness of the problem. The reporter was capturing everything, her cameraman documenting the growing number of students, stepping forward to share their own experiences. University officials huddled in urgent consultation, clearly recognizing the unfolding public relations disaster. After a hurried conference, the board chairman approached Elijah, drawing him aside for a private conversation. Solomon couldn't hear the exchange, but from his son's expression and body language, he could tell an offer was being made, likely a prestigious position or opportunity in exchange for diffusing the situation. The moment of decision was written clearly on Elijah's face as he glanced from the university officials to his father, then back again. When he rejoined the group, his expression was resolved. The university has offered me a position as student representative to the Board of Trustees with a full scholarship for an advanced legal degree, he announced loudly enough for all to hear. They've suggested this would be an opportunity to address my concerns from within the system. He paused, looking directly at the chairman. I'm declining the offer. Real change doesn't come from token positions designed to silence legitimate criticism. Solomon and Elijah exchanged a glance of perfect understanding. They had both faced similar moments throughout their careers, offered individual advancement in exchange for maintaining a broken system. Both had recognized that true honor sometimes required sacrificing personal gain for principles that mattered more. As the situation continued to unfold, Solomon noticed university security personnel beginning to position themselves near the exits. The confrontation was moving beyond the university's ability to control through traditional means, and he recognized the signs of escalation. Admiral Caldwell and his fellow SEALs also noticed the security movements, adjusting their own positions, in response with the seamless coordination of men accustomed to operating as a unit. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man with the confident bearing of substantial wealth and influence, approached Solomon directly. Commander Dryden, perhaps we could discuss this situation more privately, he suggested, his tone pleasant, but eyes cold. There are always misunderstandings in large events like these. I'm sure we can reach an accommodation that satisfies everyone's concerns. The euphemistic language didn't disguise the implicit offer to buy silence with some form of compensation. Solomon had encountered similar attempts throughout his career, the suggestion that his dignity had a price tag. With respect, sir, he replied evenly, what happened today wasn't a misunderstanding. It was part of a pattern that my son and others have experienced throughout their time here. That's not something that can be resolved with a private accommodation. The chairman's pleasant expression hardened slightly. I understand your position, Commander. However, I should point out that graduation status isn't technically finalized until all academic records have been formally certified. It would be unfortunate if administrative complications were to arise during that process. The thinly veiled threat against Elijah's degree hung in the air between them. Before Solomon could respond, President Richmond joined them, his public Relations smiled firmly in place. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office," he suggested, "away from all this distraction." Solomon recognized the attempt to isolate them from witnesses and allies. "I believe we're fine continuing right here," he replied calmly. "Transparency seems appropriate given the circumstances." The president's smile tightened as he glanced nervously at the news crew still documenting the unfolding events. "I insist," he said, his voice hardening. "Security will escort you to my office now." Two campus police officers moved forward on cue, making clear this was not a request but a demand. Solomon weighed his options, aware that direct resistance could escalate the situation beyond control. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Very well. My son and wife will accompany me, as will Senator Harrington, if he's willing." The Senator stepped forward immediately. "I wouldn't miss it," he said, his expression making clear he understood exactly what was happening. As they prepared to leave the reception hall, Admiral Caldwell approached. "We'll be monitoring the situation, Commander," he said quietly. "Semper Fi." The simple phrase carried significant weight, the Marine Corps motto a reminder that Solomon did not stand alone. The small group moved toward the exit, the news crew attempting to follow until security blocked their path. Solomon caught a final glimpse of the reception hall as they left, noting the concerned expressions of students and parents watching their departure. Whatever happened next would occur behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny. The university clearly hoped to contain the situation, but Solomon suspected they had underestimated the determination of those involved to ensure justice prevailed. The presidential suite of Westwood University exuded power and tradition, its walls lined with portraits of former university leaders, all white men in formal attire, whose stern expressions seemed to judge the current occupants. Solomon, Monique, and Elijah were seated on one side of a massive antique desk, with President Richmond, the board chairman, and the university's legal counsel on the other. Senator Harrington sat slightly to the side, his presence an unexpected complication in what the university officials had clearly planned as an intimidation session. Outside the heavy oak door, two campus security officers stood guard, effectively preventing anyone else from entering, including Admiral Caldwell and his fellow SEALs who had attempted to accompany them. The university's legal counsel, a sharp-featured woman introduced as Victoria Mercer, placed a document on the desk and slid it toward Solomon. "This is a mutual non-disclosure agreement," she explained in clipped tones. "It acknowledges that misunderstandings occurred today, but stipulates that no party admits fault. The university is prepared to offer a generous scholarship fund in Elijah's name for future minority students as a gesture of goodwill." Solomon didn't touch the document, recognizing it for what it was, a gag order with financial compensation attached. "And in exchange, we agree not to discuss what happened today," he stated, rather than asked. The attorney nodded. Public discussions. Of unsubstantiated allegations benefit no one. This allows all parties to move forward constructively. President Richmond leaned forward, his expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. "Commander Dryden, we value Elijah's contributions to Westwood and want to ensure his future success. This agreement protects everyone's interests." The implied threat was clear. Elijah's professional future could be either helped or harmed depending on their decision. Solomon glanced at his son, leaving the choice in his hands. Elijah studied the document briefly before looking up, his expression resolute. "I appreciate the university's concern for my future," he said carefully. "However, I can't, in good conscience, sign an agreement that prevents discussion of systematic discrimination that affects not just my family, but many students at this institution." The board chairman, Harold Whitfield, sighed with exaggerated patience. "Mr. Dryden, while we respect your position, I should note that all academic records undergo final review before degrees are officially conferred. During this process, discrepancies occasionally emerge that require further examination." Victoria Mercer nodded in agreement. "In fact, we've already received notification that your academic records have been flagged for review. Standard procedure, of course, but these reviews can sometimes take months to resolve. The blatant threat to withhold Elijah's degree hung in the air. Solomon felt a cold anger settle in his chest, familiar from decades of facing similar tactics. Monique reached for her purse, discreetly activating her phone's recording function, a technique Solomon had taught her years ago when dealing with discriminatory housing practices. Elijah remained composed despite the threat. That's interesting timing for a review, considering I was deemed qualified to be valedictorian just hours ago. Senator Harrington cleared his throat. As a member of the Senate Education Committee that oversees federal funding to institutions like Westwood, I find this turn of events particularly troubling. Retaliatory academic reviews following complaints of discrimination could constitute a violation of several federal statutes. President. Richmond's smile tightened. No one is suggesting retaliation, Senator. This is simply standard administrative procedure. The tension in the room was interrupted by Security Supervisor Brooks entering after a brief knock. He leaned down to whisper in the president's ear, his expression conveying urgent information. The president's face darkened as he listened. "What? Do you mean you can't remove them?" he hissed, not quite quietly enough. "They're disrupting the entire reception." Brooks responded too quietly to hear clearly, but the name Caldwell was audible, suggesting the Admiral was creating complications for the university's attempt to contain the situation. Outside the presidential suite, the sounds of a growing commotion could be heard, voices raised in what appeared to be organized chanting. President Richmond stood abruptly. "Excuse me for a moment. I need to address another matter." After he left with Brooks, the board chairman attempted to maintain control of the meeting. "Let's focus on reaching an agreement that serves everyone's interests," he suggested smoothly. "The university is prepared to be quite generous." Solomon's military training had taught him to recognize when opponents were losing tactical advantage. "Mr. Whitfield," he responded calmly, "I believe you're misunderstanding the situation. We're not negotiating for compensation. We're insisting on accountability." Victoria Mercer's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "Commander Dryden, let me be perfectly clear. Your son's academic record, your military service history, even your tax returns can all face intensive scrutiny if this situation escalates. The university has considerable resources and connections." The explicit threat confirmed Solomon's assessment of their desperation. Senator Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening a decorated military officer with investigation of his service record as retaliation for reporting discrimination? I'd like clarification before I contact my colleagues on the Armed Services Committee." The attorney backpedaled. "Immediately. I'm simply pointing out that public disputes can lead to unwanted attention for all parties involved." The door opened again as President Richmond returned, his face flushed with barely contained fury. "There's a situation developing downstairs," he announced tensely. "A number of students have begun some sort of protest in the main reception hall. The news crew is interviewing them about alleged discrimination incidents." He fixed Solomon with an accusatory glare. "Your military friends are preventing security from establishing order." Solomon maintained his composed expression, though inwardly he felt a surge of respect for Admiral Caldwell's tactical thinking. By creating a diversion downstairs, the Admiral was ensuring the university couldn't simply bury the incident behind closed doors. The balance of power was shifting. Voices in the hallway indicated more people had arrived outside the presidential suite. A firm knock on the door was followed by the entrance of a distinguished older woman, whom Solomon recognized from photographs as Dr. Eleanor Washington, one of the few black full professors at Westwood Law School. "President Richmond," she announced. Without preamble, "The faculty Senate representatives are requesting your immediate presence downstairs. Several serious allegations have been made that require your response." The president's composure finally cracked. "This is outrageous. A few disgruntled students and their families are disrupting an entire graduation ceremony over a simple seating misunderstanding." His voice rose as his frustration boiled over. "If certain people would just accept their place instead of demanding special treatment, none of this would be happening." The room fell silent at the revealing outburst. Monique's hand remained steady on her phone, capturing every word. Victoria Mercer closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the catastrophic nature of the president's statement. Dr. Washington regarded the president with cool assessment. "I believe that statement clarifies the underlying issue quite effectively, President Richmond." She turned to Solomon and his family. "Commander Dryden, the Faculty Senate would like to extend a formal apology for your treatment today and request your participation in a newly formed committee to address institutional discrimination at Westwood." The sudden shift left President Richmond sputtering incoherently, while the board chairman attempted to regain control of the situation. "Any such committee would require board approval," he insisted. "This is highly irregular." Senator Harrington stood buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate formality. "What's irregular is threatening to withhold a validly earned degree as retaliation for reporting discrimination. What's irregular is security staff targeting a decorated Marine Corps commander based on his race. What's irregular is a university president expressing such clearly discriminatory views while representing an institution that receives millions in federal funding." He turned to Solomon. "Commander Dryden, I believe we've heard enough to justify a formal investigation by the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division. Would you and your family accompany me downstairs? I think it's time we address the broader Westwood community directly." Solomon stood, Monique and Elijah following suit. No one moved to stop them as they walked toward the door, the power dynamic completely reversed from when they had entered. As they prepared to leave, Solomon turned back to face President Richmond. "When I was deployed overseas," he said quietly, "I fought to protect American values, including equality and justice. I never expected to face a more insidious battle for those same values at my son's graduation ceremony." The small group exited the presidential suite, finding Admiral Caldwell and two of his fellow SEALs waiting in the hallway, having outmaneuvered the security personnel through tactics Solomon recognized from military operations. Together, they moved toward the main staircase leading back to the reception hall, where the sounds of organized protest grew louder with each step. The confrontation had moved beyond a private grievance to become a pivotal moment for the entire institution, with consequences that would extend far beyond this single day. 3 months after the tumultuous graduation ceremony at Westwood University, Solomon Dryden sat before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., the polished wood of the witness table reflecting the harsh lights of national news cameras. The hearing room was packed with journalists, civil rights advocates, university administrators, and concerned citizens, all drawn to what had become a watershed moment in addressing institutional racism in higher education. Senator William Harrington presided over the proceedings, his gavel calling the session to order. "This hearing of the Senate Committee on Education will now examine discriminatory practices in elite educational institutions," he announced formally. "Our first witness today is Commander Solomon Dryden, United States Marine Corps, retired." Solomon leaned toward the microphone, his uniform adorned with medals earned over decades of service. The events at Westwood had catalyzed a national conversation that extended far beyond one family's experience at a single graduation ceremony. The news footage captured that day had gone viral, sparking investigations at universities across the country. "Thank you, Senator," Solomon began. "What my family experienced at Westwood University was not an isolated incident, but rather a manifestation of systemic discrimination that persists despite official policies claiming inclusion and diversity." His testimony detailed not only the confrontation with security personnel and the university's attempted intimidation, but also the broader pattern of institutional barriers his son had faced throughout his education. As Solomon concluded his statement, cameras panned to Elijah sitting in the gallery. In the 3 months since graduation, Elijah's career path had shifted dramatically. Instead of accepting a prestigious corporate law position, he had joined the Civil Rights Division of Matthews & Washington, a law firm specializing in discrimination cases. The firm was already representing 12 minority students from Westwood in a class-action lawsuit. "Commander Dryden," Senator Harrington continued, "could you tell the committee about the institutional response following these events?" Solomon nodded. The immediate aftermath was revealing. President Richmond and Dean Hamilton both resigned within 2 weeks after recordings of their statements became public. The university initially attempted to characterize the incident as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was too compelling to dismiss. He didn't mention that Monique's surreptitious recording of President Richmond's outburst had been particularly damaging, capturing his statement about people accepting their place. That recording had been played on national news programs for days afterward. "And the security company involved?" prompted another committee member. "Blue Shield Security had its contract with Westwood terminated," Solomon replied. "Subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices targeting minority students and visitors. They are currently facing multiple lawsuits and criminal charges for civil rights violations at several institutions." After Solomon's testimony concluded, Admiral James Caldwell took the witness chair. The retired SEAL commander had emerged as a powerful advocate in the months following the incident, revealing that he now headed Veterans for Equality, an organization fighting discrimination against military personnel of color. "Admiral Caldwell," Senator Harrington began, "could you explain why you and your colleagues attended the graduation ceremony that day?" The Admiral leaned forward. "We had received information through veteran networks that Commander Dryden might face discrimination at his son's graduation. Unfortunately, such treatment of black military personnel is common enough that we anticipated the problem." He paused, looking directly at Solomon. "What many people don't know is that Commander Dryden saved my SEAL team during a classified Gulf War operation. When our extraction was compromised, he volunteered for a high-risk mission that brought all of us home alive. That mission remained classified until recently, which is why Commander Dryden never received formal recognition for his actions." This revelation caused a stir in the hearing room. Solomon had never sought acknowledgement for the operation, considering it simply part of his duty. The Admiral continued, "We attended that graduation not just to support a fellow service member, but because we owed him a debt that could never be fully repaid. When we witnessed the discrimination he faced despite his distinguished service, it reinforced our commitment to addressing this issue systemically." As the hearing continued throughout the day, testimony from education experts, civil rights attorneys, and other minority students painted a compelling picture of institutional discrimination that could no longer be ignored or dismissed as isolated incidents. 1 week after the congressional hearing, Solomon and his family returned to Westwood University under very different circumstances. The institution, now under interim leadership and facing both public scrutiny and federal investigation, had organized a special ceremony to formally apologize for the treatment of minority students and implement comprehensive reforms. The grand auditorium where the confrontation had occurred 3 months earlier was now filled with students, faculty, and media representatives. On stage, the 6 Navy SEALs who had stood in silent support during the original graduation were now present in full-dress uniforms, a visual reminder of the alliance that had helped expose the university's discriminatory practices. Dr. Eleanor Washington, now serving as interim president, addressed the assembly. "Today marks not an ending but a beginning," she stated firmly. "Westwood University acknowledges its failure to live up to its stated values of equality and inclusion. We are committed to fundamental change that goes beyond superficial diversity initiatives to address the deep-rooted biases within our systems and culture." The reforms she outlined included independent oversight of admissions and grading practices, mandatory anti-bias training for all faculty and staff, revocation of discriminatory policies, and establishment of a permanent committee on institutional equity, with Solomon appointed as a key advisor. As part of the ceremony, Elijah was formally honored with full recognition of his achievements, the university acknowledging that his success had come despite systematic obstacles rather than through any special accommodation. More significantly, the 6 SEALs who had stood with Solomon took turns speaking about his role in the classified mission that had saved their lives, publicly acknowledging a debt of honor that transcended racial divisions. Admiral Caldwell approached the podium, holding a case containing a long-delayed commendation. "The Department of the Navy hereby recognizes Commander Solomon Dryden for extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty during Operation Desert Shield," he announced formally. "His actions under enemy fire saved the lives of 6 naval special warfare operators and prevented critical intelligence from falling into enemy hands. The medal itself was less meaningful to Solomon than the public recognition of truth, the acknowledgement that excellence deserves respect regardless of race. As the ceremony concluded, Monique was invited to the stage to announce her acceptance of a leadership role in the university's new diversity initiative, bringing her years of experience as a community organizer to institutional reform efforts. The most powerful moment came as the formal proceedings ended, and Solomon stood at the entrance to the campus, watching a group of new black students arriving for orientation. Beside him stood Elijah, the two men in different uniforms, one military and one legal, both dedicated to ensuring that the path would be somewhat easier for those who followed. "Do you think anything will really change?" Elijah asked quietly, watching the young students' hopeful expressions. Solomon considered the question carefully before answering. "Change never comes easily or completely," he replied, "but when people of conscience stand together against injustice, progress becomes possible." He looked at his son with profound pride. The battle isn't won in a single confrontation, but in thousands of moments when people choose dignity over comfort, truth over convenience, justice over privilege. As they watched the new students enter the campus, Solomon reflected on how a day meant for celebration had transformed into something more significant, a moment when silence was broken and long-ignored truths were finally acknowledged. The road ahead remained long and the work unfinished, but today represented a step forward in the continuing American journey toward fulfilling its founding promise of equality for all. What moments in your own life have you witnessed someone standing up against injustice? Has someone ever stood up for you when you faced discrimination? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful true stories of courage and justice, and share with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. Thank you for being part of our community that believes in dignity, respect, and equality for all. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. This powerful story illustrates that dignity cannot be bestowed by others. It must be claimed and defended through principled action. Solomon's unwavering composure in the face of discrimination demonstrates that true strength comes not from aggression, but from standing firmly in one's truth. The unexpected alliance between the Navy SEALs and Solomon reminds us that genuine loyalty transcends racial boundaries when built on shared values of honor and respect. Elijah's journey shows that excellence alone doesn't guarantee fair treatment in biased systems, but courage in confronting injustice can transform individual struggles into collective progress. The university's initial response reveals how institutions often prioritize reputation over rectifying discrimination, using intimidation and isolation to silence legitimate complaints. Senator Harrington's intervention highlights the importance of allies with privilege using their position to amplify marginalized voices. Most significantly, this story teaches us that meaningful change requires both personal courage and strategic action. Solomon's dignity, Monique's documentation, Admiral Caldwell's coordination, and Elijah's testimony created an undeniable case that couldn't be dismissed as an isolated incident. In our ongoing battle against discrimination, victory rarely comes in dramatic moments, but through persistent, principled stands taken by individuals who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Have you ever witnessed discrimination being challenged in a powerful way? Or perhaps you've been the one to stand up against unfair treatment. Your experiences matter in this ongoing conversation about equality and respect. Share your story in the comments below. Your words might give someone else the courage they need to stand firm in their own dignity. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who need to hear this message of courage and solidarity. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that shine a light on both injustice and the human capacity to overcome it. Consider sharing this video with someone facing their own battles against discrimination. Sometimes knowing others have walked similar paths can provide the strength needed to continue fighting for respect. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Remember, in the words of Solomon Dryden, change never comes easily or completely, but when people of conscience stand together against injustice, progress becomes possible.